Okay, good. It's great to be part of that, although sort of 14,000 kilometers in distance, but that actually speaks for the global reach of NMT. I'm actually in India at the the Indian National Congress of Neurorehabilitation, and that's a big thing because there are over 1,000 people here, and also a lot of international speakers. And the idea here is, and this is the second time I'm here, I was here last year, to explore with a sort of pilot workshop tomorrow for 3 hours how NMT can be introduced into India. There is no music therapy profession, so it's a very different paradigm, which is actually more typical for the rest of the world than the North Atlantic, European, and some Asian, etc., countries, South American countries. And so we have to work through allied health professionals, and we are trying to explore how we can effectively do that. Because there's a simple reason, Brian kind of hinted at that already. The president, for instance, here's an example. The president of the Indian Federation of Neurorehabilitation is an absolute 100% enthusiastic supporter of NMT. Reason being, number one, he knows the evidence. He sees the evidence, the research, and he also sees when it is practiced, people get better, and they get better. So he wants NMT in India. And number two, there is a distribution and coverage issue in most of the world for neurologic disorders, because there is not the density that we are so used to in the high-income countries that I spent all my life in terms of there's inpatient, there's outpatient, there's this. So this is actually a great test model for how can NMT become a major contributor to distance family or community-based rehabilitation. That's sort of the key term for that. And this is the other reason why my friend and colleague, Dr. Nirmal Surya, who is the president of the Indian Federation, wants NMT, because we can see, and we're beginning to think and develop more actively, that how we can bring the NMT therapist as a coach in an area where there can be a distribution to family and community-based members to help that patient to continue to get better. That is very critical. If you went to, well, you are new, but we had a consensus symposium, the second consensus NMT symposium in October, and one of the speakers was a leading neurologist, neuro-rehab neurologist in Ecuador, Dr. Nelson Maldonado, and he is trying to build neuro-rehab from scratch in Ecuador, a typical low middle-income country, because the experience, as he told us very passionately, he can make a stroke patient survive. There's a pretty good chance. That is accomplishment for medicine. But then they go home and there's nothing for them. And then the death rate is enormously high. So the NMT is accessible. It is cheap, affordable, it's portable, and it is translatable. And so these are a lot of reasons that the world, really, truly the world, and I'm on the Lancet WHO Commission for Neurorehabilitation, the world is waiting for NMT. And so that has completely changed. Like 20 years ago, we tried to introduce NMT and try to have people look at the data and then give it a try. That area is completely over. Now it's actually more, where are you? Not here we are, we would like to be part of it, rather than where are you? We are waiting for you. We are waiting for you. Okay. So every neurologist that is involved in neuro rehab wants RES in their hospital. They want MIT in the hospital. They want vocal intonation therapy for their Parkinson clinic. They want memory training in whatever geriatric settings, et cetera, et cetera. So this paradigm has beautifully changed. And this is one of the reasons I'm here, and I'm very grateful that we actually have the technology, although I really hate Zoom, but in this case, it actually is very helpful that I can be still part of that in some direct ways and talk to you. So the research is really there. Me and my team have published close to 200 research papers, 70 to 80% of them on intervention, development, and proof of effectiveness of NMT. And so that's just my group, okay, for the last 25 years, almost 200 papers. So the research is not the urgent. We need more research, and then it's the next step that we can make. No, that question has been answered. We need more research to continue to shape and respond to the needs, but not to establish NMT. NMT needs more clinicians. And so we're very happy that you took that step. And the only thing I can encourage you, because I'm not physically part of the whole rest of the weekend, the only thing I can encourage you, practice NMT and tell them the techniques you have. Memory training for dementia, music-based memory training for dementia, RES for stroke, Parkinson, TBI, cerebral palsy, vocal training, voice training for all kinds of disorders, especially Parkinson's, for instance, dysphagia, et cetera, et cetera. So sell yourself actively, confidently, but also very concretely. Don't say, I'm a music therapist and I have something with NMT on a feather in my hat. Don't say that. Doors will not open. But if you do it the other way around, coming from that part that the world actually is waiting for, you're going to be a very, very important contributor to global brain health. The biggest paradigm change in the last 15 months was probably that the World Federation of Neuro Rehab, which is the biggest medical rehab neurology association in the world, has extended this institutional partnership membership to the academy. And so the academy is recognized, the members of the academy are recognized as medical partners. So once you complete your program, you'll be a member. You're going to have the code you can get on the website. You have all the privileges. You can read the leading neuro rehab journals for free. You get reduced rates for conferences. You can benefit in many ways communicating with the rest of the world, because the academy is now in the distribution system of the World Federation. So that's a complete game changer. And that is actually, I have to say, I was hit home very nicely 2 weeks ago, almost in a sentimental way, because my music psychology dissertation supervisor, Dale Bartlett, who was on the same team with Bob Ankliffe, who's one of the pioneers of music therapy in the US. He's still alive, and he reads the AARP journal magazine, and he says, I just read about a big feature on the neuro research and the NMT stuff, and he said, that's what we as first generation pioneers were hoping for. So we are not a breakaway. We are actually maybe the fulfillment of the expectations. So just that as a little bit of an introduction. And then I want to go through research and show you the evidence and show you some of the applications. so that you get sort of oriented to where we are with all of that. And there is especially great improvement, and not great improvement, great advancement in understanding some of the underlying mechanisms. We have clinical data that are very strong. And with, just as I said, was from our end, my group, almost 200 publications. That is actually a case to be made, and many people actually make that outside of NMT. Many people come to me and say, your interventions are the best researched in neurorehabilitation. The NMT interventions are the best research. Best research. I hear that over and over and over. So walk with confidence and enjoy your NMT life. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit after the intro talk. Just to give you a little orientation, it's about 6 o'clock here in the afternoon, so I'm at the opposite end of the time scale, but it's still a very reasonable time to be talking to you. So this is a slide that I like to show frequently. It shows these are 45,000-year-old bone flutes, and basically what they show is music is a hardwired, biologically hardwired part of the human brain. It's a language the brain developed actually from an evidence point of view, from an artifact point of view, before it developed written speech. But we don't know how oral speech actually was developed at that time. But we know that people were pretty good flautists because these boreholes are equal distance. So they must have spent a lot of time in a completely hostile natural environment building flutes, and then building them in a way, figuring out with any technology you have, figuring out how to measure distances so you can play. So the idea of music, bringing music back, not just as an advancement of the human brain, but also as an advancement to retrain the human brain, is ancient, ancient, ancient. Okay, next slide. Oh, there it is. My computer has a little delay here. Okay, so here are some principles that are very important for you to wrap your brain around what NMT is. First of all, it's based on neuroscience research in music. And what do we research when we research the brain in music? We research music perception, music cognition, and music production. Okay. So music perception, processing, stimulus, cognition, thinking about the stimulus, production, producing this musical stimulus. Okay. So that's the basis of the music neuroscience. And as clinical music neuroscience, we actually investigate clinical translations. Is there something in the rhythm perception that actually entrains the motor system, makes stroke patients walk better? Is there something in music cognition, in memory development in music, that actually helps dementia people to hang on to cognitive functions beyond their regular decline? Is there something in music production? Can an aphasic person sing words and then improve their ability to communicate? So the translational process is what clinical music science, neuroscience investigates, and that's where most of my research in the last almost 30 years has gone. So this actually has led me away completely from traditional music therapy 35 years ago. And my mentors back then at Michigan State were actually very much in favor of that. That we have moved it so far, there needs to be a new paradigm that follows what we wanted to do. We would wanted to do music brain research in 1950, 1960, and 1970, but it was not possible. The discoveries that we made 25 plus years ago in terms of rhythm perception, for instance, RAS, were actually showed us that we're on the right track. Thinking about music as the rehabilitative stimulus, not the associations in terms of what does that remind you of, et cetera, not the cultural roles, the social, purely social, emotional well-being aspect. No, the actual experience of the language perception and practice of music that changes the human brain. And so why did we create neurologic music therapy? Because going to medical conferences became too dangerous for me. Because the medical doctor said, we know your research, we have replicated it, it's incredible. We have tried it with stroke patients, it is incredible. What a discovery. But I don't have anybody on my staff who can actually do it. So rethink, rethink, rethink. This is when a group of people, Corinne, Dr. McIntosh, Ruth Rice, others, sat down and said, we need to actually create a new field, almost like a new profession. And this is why NMT came into being. To answer that request, actually from the medical. So the interesting thing is, just to highlight a few important things, when we put people in the brain scanner, and there's, I think, really consensus among all my colleagues, neuroscience colleagues, music is probably the most pervasive stimulus to activate huge tracts of the brain. Everything from motor to cognition, executive function, language, emotional areas, everything is activated. Functional areas. So I list some of them: motor control, executive function, memory, attention, language. So in other words, music activates supramodal, which means not specific to music or only specific to language, supramodal control systems in the brain. And that allows us to say, hey, we can actually go in there and with training and exercise and proper stimulation, you can actually retrain the brain. So that's a little bit of a schematic slide, what I just did. Music processing involves core cognitive motor language systems of the human brain. And these numbers relate to the BA Brodmann areas labeled by function in the brain, and you can look this up in any neuropsychology text what the numbers mean. So what region they characterize. So that's an amazing fact that is actually extremely important in the therapeutic role of music, and I'll come back to it. Right here. I've been doing some thinking, trying to make this sort of almost reductionist to a point where we can say, from all these enormous amounts of research and benefits and mechanisms that we see that music induces in neurologic disorders, can we sort of group that and extract a limited number of basic fundamental mechanisms, how music operates in neurologic music therapy. And therefore, I would say that's probably it. And we can revisit that throughout the next hour and a half. In terms of where do you see this in the research, and I'm showing just a very, very few videos because the rest of the faculty and Dr. Corina will show plenty of that. So rhythmic entrainment, that is one fundamental mechanism. Rhythmic entrainment, I actually beautifully misspelled that, I'll correct it later, means there is the music rhythm is an oscillatory system that locks in time brain processes. And that is most obvious for the eye to see in movement, walking, hand movement. But entrainment also happens in attention systems, cognitive systems, speech systems. Everything in the brain is oscillatory. So it's not most visually, most obvious. We can see that entrainment effect in motor control. But rhythmic entrainment is a key fundamental mechanism that is unique to music and rhythm. The second mechanism is everything in music-based interventions creates augmented auditory feedback. Things become audible when I do them right, or when I try to do them right again. Augmented auditory feedback. So, pimp, continue my movement correctly, I hear a drum sound. But auditory feedback can also make cognitive processes audible. When I'm supposed to stop playing because I hear a target sound that I need to select attentionally, I stop playing or I hit a certain instrument. My cognitive response, my attention response now is audible to yourself and to the rest of the world. Tonification is sort of an extension of feedback because that means we are sort of, with some technology, creating turn our body into sound. Okay, so we have acoustical sensors, et cetera, et cetera. So I move my elbows, and when I get into the right range of motion, then I get sound. So I know my paretic arm is getting better. Okay. I just list that because that is a very exciting part of augmented auditory feedback, sort of to the extreme. Yes. The third mechanism is music perception, cognition, production creates a huge connected network system in the brain. So it's not just the whole brain lights up, but the whole brain also lights up in synchrony in a connected functional network or in sub-networks. Increased functional network connectivity. That is one of the highlights in brain research and music, even if you don't do it with stroke rehabilitation or other forms of neurologic disorders. Okay. So a healthy brain operates in a connected fashion. And so music-based, NMT-based interventions inevitably, and I'll show you some evidence of that, will increase functional network connectivity throughout the brain. And we have observed sort of two types of connectivity increase. One is shifting to alternate networks. For instance, a Broca's aphasia patient can't speak because the left hemisphere is damaged, for instance, let's say in the Broca's area. By singing, there's certain elements in singing, in terms of inflection, pitch, slow down, et cetera, that whole network moves from the damaged side to the undamaged side, the right hemisphere. Now the person can actually sing his name or sing functional statements. So one connectivity response to music we have seen is shifting. The other one is actually restoring. Damaged networks can be retrained due to brain plasticity. Okay, so the network recruits neurons that have not been part of the original network and repairs itself to a certain extent. So shifting, restoring are the two sub-mechanisms in that big connectivity issue. And then something that we need to definitely acknowledge, because there's so much research coming out, how important motivational states are for the success of rehabilitation. That has been really researched, underestimated, and really almost a little bit on neglect on that. Enhanced motivation states. And we had a brilliant presentation on how NMT has implicit, embedded power to enhance motivational states during the rehabilitation process. We had that presentation was given by Dr. Dana Böhring, a German neurologist who is also very involved in the European Federation leadership. And so she spoke at the second consensus symposium in October, and she laid out a beautiful framework for that NMT interventions, when they're done right, they cannot hide the motivational enhancement effect. I give you a very impressive, for me still miraculous example. We did a study with Alzheimer patients on memory, which I show some data later on, but the part of the research that really scared us was they had to go into the fMRI machine twice. And fMRI is not very pleasant. I've been there some months for medical reasons because of my neck, and then I also wanted to explore how that feels before I tell people, please go into the fMRI for me, because I would love to do some research with you. I wanted to be honest, faithful to that situation. I wanted to see how it is. They're not the most comfortable places. And so we had 17 Alzheimer patients recruited. They all climbed during the pre-test into the brain scanner. And then we had, like 3 weeks later, the second brain scan scheduled. And we were really wondering how many people would show back up after their first experience. People with dementia. They all came. We didn't have a single dropout. So these people were motivated by the benefits of daily structured music listening and how that improved some of their memory access through autobiographically relevant music. Okay, so if people say, how does that music business work? How does it work? Well, it helps the brain. No, we know actually there are 4 mechanisms: entrainment, feedback, connectivity, motivation. That should be in your wallet. Pull it out. Entrainment, feedback, connectivity, motivation. Okay, and that finally leads us to something you are familiar with. What is neurologic music therapy? Defined as an evidence-based professional field of standardized music-based interventions in 3 domains. And that has been an extremely robust status. And it has been well accepted across the world by now. And not just well accepted. No, sorry, the paradigm has shifted. It is requested. It's not accepted. It is much requested in the world. I had a journalist send me an email the other day. She said, I hear that you have several videos of patients, how that all works. And also I hear that you have, you said in some paper that, NMT is practiced in several countries. Can you mention a country? I will write her back when I'm back from India. Okay, just go to the United Nations. Pick your country. So those days are over, and that's good. If you live in Canada or the US, RES is actually included for all of Canada in the Canadian Heart and Stroke guidelines, recommendations. And in the US, it's included in the VA and the Department of Defense Stroke Care guidelines. So, and then the institutional membership I already talked about. And this is something we don't need to talk about that much because this is, evident and is available. And the handbook, maybe that's a nice piece of news. This handbook, the award-winning NMT Oxford University Press handbook of NMT, is actually coming out in second edition. I'm extremely excited. It's a great edition. We added authorship, we added paper, some new chapters, but we also revised. People worked diligently to revise the book, and it's coming out in August, end of August. The second edition comes out in August, and that's really, really exciting. Good. We don't need to talk about that. Most importantly is, since the world is requesting your service, please stay with the Academy. Don't drop out. Don't become a hybrid. Stay with the Academy. And there is the gold standard of the fellowship for renewal, but the Academy has recognized that that is too narrow and singular. So there are many flexible ways to maintain your NMT membership and your currency in the status in the Academy. Okay. And this is just a tribute to Kim, who created something that I really, really like, maps. So I love maps. And so she created an NMT map. And we need, as you can see, NMT is essentially traveling all over the world, but we need a lot more. So I'm in India right here, not much. And I talked virtually at the African Congress of Neurorehabilitation in October and early November. And look here, I was virtually in Nigeria. Lots needs to be done here. Okay, so these are the techniques you're gonna learn. We can skip that. And let's look a little bit at some sort of underlying neuroscience. The auditory system here is your fastest time processing system in the brain, sensory system in the brain, fastest time processing sensory system in the brain. So the auditory system is the big brain timer, because all auditory information is oscillatory time. And the most complex auditory architecture we find in music. Okay. So this is why we actually have picked music. So the auditory system processes information very fast across the brainstem and connects at every intersection. It connects with other functional places like the cerebellum, spinal cord, etc., etc. And then it travels into the subcortical regions of the cerebrum and the cortical regions of the cerebrum and continues to connect with other regions of the brain. And this is a nice illustration of that. This is the acute fasciculus, which is a pathway, a fiber bundle of neurons, dendrites and axons, that synapse, which is other coming out of the auditory cortex. This is where the sound terminal is, comes from the ear all the way up here. Here it is, and now it is projected into non-motor regions. In blue, everything prefrontal cortex. Down here is probably some of that is actually still motor lobe, Broca's area. Some of that is already prefrontal cognitive. But the yellow stain is connected actually to the premotor cortex and the primary motor cortex. So when the auditory neurons fire in time, entrainment, because you hear a rhythmically beat accented music, the auditory neurons fire in time in exact resonance with the beat frequency. So what happens at this moment here, at the tip of the yellow, where the dendrites of the motor neurons are sitting on top, synapsing with the motor neurons. What happens to the motor, with the auditory neurons? What happens to the motor system? It starts firing in resonance with the auditory incoming stimulus. And what's the consequence of that? Well, the motor cortex is control center of the brain. It says, it doesn't really say it, it shoots signals down into the spinal cord for what? The legs to move in time. That is one of the many layers where the auditory system interacts functionally and shapes functionally other systems of the brain. Okay, so this is the uppermost neocortical level, but on many other regions we have the same effect. Okay. All right, then we go in the wrong direction. Okay. So this is the premotor cortex up front here. And this is actually auditory guided movement, music guided movement, activates the primary motor cortex, but also very strongly the supplementary motor area, which is a big coordinated unit in the motor system. This is an interesting study where you can see that on an EEG level, where we have surface electrodes. People tap rhythmically, self-paced. You see a firing pattern here of motor neurons, kind of fuzzy, but there's periodicity. People are listening to an auditory beat, very sharp, well-defined signal in time. Auditory neurons fire in exact resonance to the beat. And now people tap their hand, the rhythm, and this fuzzy cloud signal becomes suddenly a very well-shaped ball kind of signal, very well-defined in time. From here, from fuzziness and noise to the external auditory input that clears up the fuzziness and the noise and makes a beautiful motor neural signal, and that is also then the neural basis for better timed performance. And here's a little accidental finding in the design of our study that is clinically very relevant. These people listen to the beat first, and then they tap to the beat. These people tap first, and then they get the beats added. So this signal is much better in terms of clean, less noise, less fuzziness than this, which means before you get your patient engaged, turn the music on, turn the metronome on, turn your signal on, and have them listen so the brain gets primed to be in the state of readiness. So have them listen to the beat for 30 seconds, a minute, and then say, move. Not the other way around. Don't turn on and say, move right away. Let the brain warm up to the beat. Okay, so now I rearranged my whole presentation, although most of the slides are the same, but we can also upload this in that particular sequence if you like, prefer that. So this is more by application technique. So gait training, you look at RAS, rhythm perception, entrainment, go back to the fundamental mechanisms. Okay, here you have it schematically. People walk into the beat. Okay, here you have two landmark studies that one came out in 97 and one in 2007. They're both recognized as sort of landmark RAS establishment in stroke. These people trained 2 weeks post-stroke and then for 6 weeks daily. this group practiced, that was also 2 weeks post-stroke, and then practiced daily for 3 weeks. These people for 6 weeks. So RES was in all major 4 gait parameters statistically significant, 164%, 107%, et cetera, et cetera. The more conventional standard gait therapy also worked, so they improved, but RES improvement was significantly higher, which leads to more functional abilities quicker, which also can lead to actually dismissal, discharge. 3 weeks, we see the same idea, except 3 weeks, a little less magnitude. So an extra 3 weeks training, whatever shape, outpatient most likely, and still improve things. Okay, and this is basically, let's skip this. We go straight to stroke patient. So this is a patient that was part of the study, 4 weeks post-stroke, and he became part of the study. Sorry, this is sort of an entrainment experiment. And just watch his walk. He has a paretic left-sided leg and arm. This is a very old video, so from one of the landmark videos that our labs now look much more automaticized with cameras and stuff. And markers. So, okay, so this is the immediate effect now. And the sequencing is much better because the signal, the timing signal is cyclical. And why does he look more symmetric? Look at the left leg movement in relationship to the beat. Yeah, I think you can see it quite nicely now. The rhythmic timing signal clears out the sequencing in the brain. It gets the noise out. So what does his left leg do that it did not do without RES? It gets moving early. It comes out early, okay? So look at that. There it goes, there it goes, there it goes. Now he gets stuck a little bit, and off he goes. And this is actually, after 6 weeks, he became part of the study, as I said. This is 6 weeks after the end of training. So that was one of the first discoveries. We called that technique RES, and that changed my thinking and a lot of people thinking about the role of music in brain rehab. Okay, rhythm perception, music perception. This is a TBI example. This lady is 9 years post TBI, and there's still an immediate effect. She's trying to jog, so she wants to jog again. So metronome set at 150. and really no further instructions. And technically, she actually runs now because she has one leg in the air. And there are moments when both legs are actually briefly. So an immediate dramatic. This is an interesting example because I was involved in that. It was a bit of a scary situation for me. That was in Ecuador. This is actually Dr. Nelson Maldonado there. I already mentioned his name. He showed me his new rehab clinic. He's trying to build new rehab from scratch. And there was this early, still severe stage TBI on the treadmill who had not been walking at all, except he hangs on the treadmill and then treadmill moves his legs. So Nelson said if I could try RES with him, because I had read my papers. So I said, yes, I can. I had only seen the kid for 10 seconds. So I did not know how severe he was. Would he respond, et cetera, but I had to say yes. I can't say, no, maybe I come back next year. So I tried it. And so I had to trust my own research. And so we got the kid off the treadmill so we could, if there's an effect, we need to be able to see that independently from the moving band there. And so the first thing I needed to do is show the assistants how to walk a stroke patient off on the ground, because they try to walk side by side, which they can't hold in the cross. So it has to walk behind. So I used the TheraPan to sort of demonstrate how a gait belt would work. And then you'll see the rest. So he's supposed to walk. But see, there's not much motion. There's so much noise in the motor system due to the brain damage that he's basically completely stuck. So occasionally he makes sort of a step forward, but that doesn't really lead into the oscillatory gait movement. There's a lot of noise in his gait oscillators in the brainstem and spinal cord. Oop. So it was good to show them proper safety procedure, right? Side by side, they would have never caught it. They would have never caught it. He would have been on the ground. So you don't see his feet yet because the camera is not going fast enough, but what can you see already? Upper trunk, arm movement. So you can hear excitement breaks out in the country because that they had never seen that, and the kid had never walked before. He was never even on the treadmill, and there was an immediate response, a physiological, almost a reflexive response to the auditory oscillator signal, cleaning up the noise and getting him to move in a rhythmic fashion. And there were actually moments when he got stuck a little bit, but he waited to get the leg again moving on the beat. So with RES, you have a tremendous tool to work, and I can guarantee you that every neurologist who's interested in neuro rehab, not all neurologists are interested in neuro rehab, but neuro rehab neurologists, everybody in the world, they would like to have somebody who knows how to do RES in their hospital. Job guaranteed. Okay. So we did some research with Parkinson. So we had stroke, we had TBI, Parkinson, lots of research with Parkinson. Here's a quick effect video. So this is from a Parkinson clinic in Germany, in Belitz, south of Berlin. This is work from Stefan Meinke, who's an NMT fellow and has now actually also got his doctorate. So that parcours is set up. The worst case scenario for a Parkinson patient to walk through. Changes in surface, sliding doors open, turning. So he stumbles through. So an irregular internal clock, motor clock mechanism regulated into regulation cyclicity by the auditory rhythmic signal, which is oscillative. Okay. So the auditory oscillations drive, entrain the irregular noise embedded internal oscillations. So the other thing, little clinical observation, he doesn't walk straight on the beat. He walks always a little bit behind the beat consistently. So beat perception is really interval perception because the brain needs to create an interval measurement before it, so it knows when the next beat occurs. Okay. So beat perception is interval perception, and we call that actually that distance between the beats, we call that the period. And that's what the brain actually trains to, the period of the rhythm. And we've done some hand tapping experiments with Parkinson because we cannot measure their brain while they're walking, although that's about to change because we have portable EEG and we also have probably a connection to portable MEG at the University of Colorado. But for the meantime, we have been able to see in hand movement that rhythmically paced hand movement actually activates the cerebellum in Parkinson patients. There's not much going on still in the basal ganglia, little residual enhancement, but the basal ganglia is where the problems are. So there is a new network, functional connectivity, alternate, remember, shifting from the dysfunctional basal ganglia to the cerebellum, accessing an alternate network to make that person functionally more. That's a great one. I leave this. So this patient is basically about to fall. And look how the foot movement, ankle movement is changing. Okay, safe movement now because there is a regular timer that makes the movement good. And I want to maybe come to that first, because we did a group with participation that had a history of falls. And so we had a control group and an experimental group that trained for 8 weeks with RS. Then the one group dropped out of training and then come back in. So what we saw is very clear. We saw a number of falls going down with this RS, but the group that dropped out for 8 weeks started falling, and then they caught up. And that was very strongly associated with the dorsiflexion of the ankle. So this is a graduate student. They're always good, healthy controls. And so this is the swing phase of the leg in the air of the ankle. And so there's nice movement, flexion to get the toes off, and then straighten out, and then flexion again to heel, land on the heel. And that the graduate student can perform that equally good with or without metronome. Here's a patient. No metronome. Flat, just like what you saw with the other patient. The patient, flat. So taken off flat, ankle, landing flat, falling over. And here is what happens when there is a timing signal, a predictable timing signal. Look at this. That looks exactly like the healthy curve. Good. So let's go back to this. Long-term progress, maintenance, important issue. Parkinson, 3 weeks of training, improvement 53, 6 meters to 65. And then no training for a week, no training for another week, no training for another week. Still good. 4th week, first decline, 5th week, almost back to baseline. So there is a decline. It's a disease that is progressive disease. But with training or even interval training schedules, people can maintain function. So that's an important piece of data to answer, because the question comes, how long does that last? Well, there is a very simple answer to that. Use it or lose it. Okay, so if you get well during your training period, you go home and you don't continue, then your function will go. It's very similar to a musician brain. Okay, you practice. You for 4, 5, 6 years, you are incredibly good. You don't practice anymore. You are not maintaining that level of performance. Exactly the same. So practice for the patient, just like yourself. Nothing will last. Okay, let's look at upper extremity, full body coordination, TIMP, PSA, entrainment, and now with TIMP, of course, you have this very, very strong augmented auditory feedback element that is so important. The increased connectivity, another part, augmented feedback, accessing alternate networks, storing previous networks. You will see examples of that now. So Parkinson, TIMP training for 3 weeks, I think, and measuring the connectivity between the auditory cortex and the motor cortex. So you measure that simply by looking at the sensors activity on the auditory cortex and then the motor cortex when they light up together at the same time. That means they're probably talking to each other. They're synchronized. So this is pre-test. This is the better brainwave band. This is about 18, 20 hertz, et cetera, et cetera. This is the gamma. This is higher. This is 25, 30 and higher. And so there is connectivity. But after 3 weeks of training, in the post-test, there is significantly enhanced connectivity between the auditory and the motor cortex. Significantly enhanced connectivity. And here's the actual signal, pre-NMT auditory, pre-NMT motor. And now you can see after the training, this is the actual signal that you just saw schematically. Much more stronger signal, much more deep red, that's the key. This signal is also bigger and much more deep red. That is the actual neural signal that is graphed out here. And that leads to then decrease in tapping error and better timing stability. This is a dopamine study that we finished part of that. We are now back up doing this again, looking at actually dopamine imaging. So we're imaging neurotransmitters. It's not topographical imaging in terms of regions, this part, rather than the neurotransmitters. How active are they? How much are they released and taken up? So we're looking specifically at the basal ganglia because that's the area of interest in Parkinson. This is with healthy subjects, young subjects. Self-paced tapping, a lot of dopamine uptake. Rhythmically cued tapping, decrease in dopamine. So that surprised us because we thought music would increase the neurotransmitter activity of dopamine, but in this case, it actually decreased and they tapped better, but they needed less dopamine. They tapped better, but they needed less dopamine. So the question is, if we do this with Parkinson and we have actually imaging right now, Parkinson patients again, after COVID, that could mean maybe the musical pacing reduces the need of a system that's actually not sufficiently there. So stay tuned, but this is a very unusual study that we can do because we have dopamine, we have neurotransmitter imaging possibilities. You have to do PET scan, but you also have to create certain tracers that can actually trace neurotransmitters. Okay, and here is another example with Parkinson we're doing right now. There's a teaching hospital at the University of Toronto Western Hospital, and they do DBS surgery, deep brain stimulation surgery. So they open the skull, they do an implant into the basal ganglia area of Parkinson patients that creates a current to get rid of or reduce tremor, severe tremor especially. And then they wait for 2 or 3 days, do experiments, look at everything okay, close up the scalp, and then here's the pacemaker. So there is a 3-day window into the cells, the neurons themselves. And fortunately, the guy who does the electrophysiology, Robert Chen, was actually very excited to test exactly what we just did before here. No, sorry, forget it. Music, rhythm-paced, hand movement versus self-paced. So here's what came out. First, this would be a normal picture. Some healthy person taps, and here's the beat, here's the movement, and you have desynchronization of the neurons, so the neurons desynchronized, they don't fire together anymore. And then after the tap's completed on the beat, then we have strong resynchronization sort of as a signal we think the signal means movement is terminated and now prepare for the next movement. So what we see in the self-paced tapping is we don't see that. Okay, so here is the tap, and we see desynchronization, but after the tap, there is no change. There's no termination and prepping system, a signal, it just continues desynchronized. Okay, so this would blue. That's not good. When we add the rhythmic pacer, then restore, remember about connectivity, that network is restored. We have this beta rebound restored. The rhythmic cue restores that signal. Now it looks like this. Here, versus no. So connectivity change, significant connectivity change. And that is the basis of also highly improved tapping performance. You can skip that. And a quick word to enhanced network connectivity, restoring previously functioning networks. This is a dissertation, one of my students, Stephanie Levine, with people from Wake Forest University, Jonathan Burdett and Paul Laurenti. And they're doing network science analyses. In other words, they're looking at thousands of voxels and then correlating them to create neighborhood maps. Who talks to who in the brain? And how strong is that talk? Is it a loose friendship or is it a tight friendship? And with RES, the friendship in the basal ganglia, the neuronal friendship group becomes significantly tighter and stable. That's with healthy people. And we'll try to do this now, part of a dissertation with Parkinson patients. So we would have a change in the connectivity of the function network. Hopefully, we know behaviorally that Parkinson walks and moves better with music, but we'd like to find out, is this the mechanism? The connectivity in the neurons is enhanced. We can skip that. Few words to upper extremity. Upper extremity are not intrinsically rhythmic like walking, but if we create repeat patterns of movement, like a simple reaching movement, and then repeat it, make it cyclical, and then we can throw all the NMT-based entrainment business at them, at that system. So we compared actually what we may call a form of TIMP movement, the PSE actually moving the arm from one point to another, following music with PSE or with constraint-induced therapy, which means the good arm is covered, so it can't be used, and then everything has to be done with the paretic arm. And the improvements between pre-CIT, post-CIT, and pre-PSE and post-PSE is exactly the same. So without that constraint of locking the good arm up, the bad arm, and everything is more normal in range and setup, does the same effect. So these are all TIMP examples, more sort of standard with percussion instruments. This is oops, maybe I didn't record any sound with that. Anyway, we have it a sound tablet, and you can play on that with your hand reaching movement, and you get digital reproduced sound back. So that is basically a variety of TIMP setups, and we used that for a big stroke study we did. Finished it 3 years ago, was a dissertation, and we did chronic stroke, 9 sessions over 3 weeks. One group had continuous 45 minutes active physical TIMP. One group had 30 minutes active TIMP and 15 minutes imagery of what that just did, repeating the exercise in the brain. And then one group had, the middle group here, had 30 minutes of active TIMP and imagery, training, TIMP imagery, and they had an external metronome. So all 3 groups actually improved significantly, which is good. So you can actually use imagery training when people don't have the stamina to go for the whole session over and over and over. The best group was the active 45. The second best was 30 minutes training and then imagery training. And the weakest was with the imagery accompanied by an external metronome. That apparently created a little bit of a conflict between the internal image and the external pacer. So that we published these very exciting data because they show upper extremity TIMP works beautifully, even in chronic stroke. Then we did something that's very unique. We had accelerometry measures on the wrist, and that would allow us to peek into the arm movement, not just pre-post. It actually let us look into the arm movement action in the session itself, which with the pre-post design we don't catch. So what happened in the session when people were reaching out to instruments, getting augmented feedback, movement made audible? The interesting thing is that what improved consistently most over those sessions, which is then probably the major effect of TIMP, the power of acceleration increased. What does that mean? Acceleration means change of speed, the rate of change of speed. So in other words, people were not moving faster, the arm faster. They used the arm speed control in terms of speeding up, slowing down. That was the big outcome. Pretty weak at the outset of the first session, and then it got better and better, especially at the end. These are average data across the group. So in other words, that auditory feedback and the environment, the embedded into rhythmic pacing, help people to control the rate of change. Fast, slow, speeding up, slowing down as needed to execute the movement properly. The peak width means it's more stable, less variability. And then the nice thing that we see here is this 4 hertz and less per second movement is considered intentional movement. Anything above is not intentional. That's like tremor or overflow movement. So the TIMP session created a drive into essential movement frequencies on a stable ability to change speed, control the change of speed. That's very exciting finding. And we published that in the Frontiers in Rehabilitation Science, and it was actually editor's choice. So you have a great amount of evidence in TIMP that works through entrainment, augmented feedback, and then it also establishes new connectivity patterns. Okay? Now we're going to skip all of that. I think you're going to see plenty of beautiful stuff. This video you all just saw, and it's a little odd, I forgot to turn it around, but this is a outpatient community-based clinic in Tanzania. And so here, TIMP has to be done in an almost community-based setting. Okay. So, okay. So the reason I'm showing this a little longer, sorry, is these are typical settings in those kind of countries. And this stuff can be transported into a community-based setting, low technology, low cost, very easily. It's almost like you don't have to have the therapist there. Probably some person that you instruct to do this can just be as good. You as the coach that distributes knowledge and monitors knowledge and implementations. Okay. That's where this whole thing is going to go. Because that's where 90% of the world sits with neuro rehab. And this is very difficult to imagine with other professions, PT, OT, in terms of effectiveness, with very little technology, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So this is why I wanted to show you that picture a little bit. So let's talk about speech language interventions, including audiology. And it's a very important domain. My personal research in that area has been relatively moderate, maybe modest. The motor research area is much, much larger. From my group output-wise, also cognition now is catching up greatly. So we are looking at some sort of new research drive to get also from my lab at the University of Toronto into speech language interventions and look at them in more detail. But the existing evidence is certainly already good to be very active, and a lot of NMTs actually work with the speech language interventions, also sometimes in collaboration. So melodic intonation therapy, I have several examples which I will not show because you're going to get all of that in great detail with Dr. Corrine. That's why I'll show you some interesting data in terms of connectivity, enhanced connectivity, network connectivity, shifting. Okay, so this girl had it's a young girl, 12 years old. She had a hemorrhagic stroke on the left side, wipeout of her language system over there, melodic intonation therapy. When they began, the right arcuate fasciculus, which is the connector between the auditory cortex and Broca's area, was basically not functionally engaged. So it's not like there were no neurons. This is not a hole in the brain, but they were not functionally engaged. That network was there, but was not engaged. And now with training, you can see it gets darker, 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 darker. Now it's really dark blue after many, many sessions. I think 120 or something like this. That arcuate fasciculus is now operating. It's operational. That's probably a good word. It's operational. Okay, so neurons that have not been working in that area connected are now were recruited, and the network shape was changed. There was not a network, an operational network on the right hemisphere, because it was on the left hemisphere. Okay, so there is the third fundamental mechanism, and then she had a twin sister with no stroke, and you can see that this now looks like her twin sister's arcuate fasciculus on the left side, because that twin sister didn't have a stroke, so she still uses the dominant left hemisphere. So these are data from communication units per minute, et cetera, et cetera. Those are typical good MIT picture naming assessments. And I know that you have a big session on assessment anyway. So this is from Gottfried Schlauch, a colleague of mine, who used to be at Harvard, and he's now at the University of Massachusetts, I think located in Springfield. His campus is in Springfield. There's Ineke van der Meulen, who is from Holland. She has done a lot of MIT research, and she has shown a lot of support for melodic intonation therapy in aphasia. Musical stimulation, speech stimulation, that is a technique that was developed by not the musical part, but just the reflexive speech, automatic speech stimulation was developed by an Italian SLP researcher. Her name was Anna Basso in the 70s, trying to access some of them actually subcortically oriented reflexive, non-propositional automatic speech reflexes. And so we took that system, that idea, that paradigm, and added it into music, because musical lyrics have been sort of overlearned over the exposure, and so we almost reflexively start singing along when we hear a melody, or adding words at the end, silent light, holy, everybody will say night automatically. I had another reflexive speech experience. Actually, I tried to really not to have that anymore, but on this week, on Tuesday morning, when I checked in Frankfurt at the airplane counter, Lufthansa, and she did everything, boom, 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 boom. And this one was in German, and she said, I translated it for you. She said, have a nice flight. And I said, you too. So, from have a nice day in a shop, you too. That's okay. But obviously, she's not going to have a flight. So that was a classical nice idea of non-propositional speech. Anyway, so that is actually sometimes used pre-MIT, because it goes actually even deeper in accessing alternate networks. So this is a nice little study where a subject who had a complete wipeout on the left hemisphere in terms of speech language centers sings a familiar song and gets 60%, almost 60% of the words corrected. Okay. And even speaking the words, he gets still 30% correct. However, when that same subject is supposed to sing an unfamiliar song, 8%. So it's not the melody of the song, it's not the music, it is the familiarity that becomes so overlearned that the music is a scaffold, the melody is a scaffold to trigger that. So MuStim is a very interesting technique, and speech SLP therapists always look for tools to trigger non-propositional automaticized speech. And music is a really, really good one. I will skip most of these, just this one I want to show you because that is very interesting, oromotor and respiratory exercises. And this gentleman had 2 strokes. And some of that actually here is dysphagia related. He has really lost control over his swallowing system. I confirmed that with the therapist here. This is actually Stefan Meinker right here. And so there is a technique for dysphagia. It's called extraparietal muscle strength training. And this is basically on that principle, except here we make him, when he does it correctly, we make it audible. Augmented auditory feedback. So pusten means blow in German. So he's trying. But there's not much there. So without any tool to help, you can't do it. So now the tool Stefan uses is a blow instrument, a little harmonica. So if he gets any expiratory action correct, what will happen? Because now he has a feedback instrument in front of him. He will create a sound, which gives him knowledge of result. Okay. That's like a detective story. Can you do it? That is. That is. But once he gets the first sound out, he can actually repeat it. Why? Because the sound tells him your respiratory and muscular system did it right. Okay, oh, this is how to do it. Okay, augmented feedback, extremely important for all kinds of learning, especially motor learning. And now this goes beautifully. I showed this video to some SLPs, and they're very impressed with that, because swallowing is a big issue, and also a very difficult issue to solve, or especially in stroke. So you can see the action, how all the augmented feedback, how it works. As soon as he got somehow he got that coordinated right when he got the sound, then he could continue that, because he had learned, the feedback told him this is how to do it. Okay, this is, happily skip that. This is an interesting study, not from us, from a group from Joy Hirsch's group from Colombia. Sort of the segue between language and cognition, autism. So these kids listen to parents' speech, taped controls, healthy kids, typically developing, have the language centers nicely operating here. Autistic kids, no activation at all. Now, however, if you translate that whole model into singing, now they listen to lyrics the parents are singing. The typically developing kids don't really have their language center active anymore. They're just sort of listen appreciatively to their parents doing music. So you have scattered activity on the right side. But the autistic kids here, the language network is restored. Remember, functional connectivity, shifting, restoring. The functional network is restored. Now we have the activity similar to healthy kids in song. So the musical addition triggered a different network process that simulates language processing. Okay, so attention networks in the brain are very important. It's a very important function. And musical exercises can really engage the attention system in very, very specific ways. The sustained attention, selective attention, alternating, that's, you're all going to learn that. And I'm very grateful to my wife that she's taken over that segment while I can teach that this weekend. So here's some interesting data from a study that we did in Düsseldorf many years ago with Dr. Stefan and Dr. Humber. So isochronous tapping to a regular beat, synchronization, entrainment, very simple. Sensory motor cortex active, cerebellum active, mostly left hemisphere here because they're tapping with their right hand. Prefrontal attentional networks, 0. Because it doesn't take much attention to just hear a metronome and tap. That is almost reflexive. Now, if we create a pattern into the metronome, so it alternated between fast, normal, slow, normal, like a same sine wave, and then say to the person, tap, follow it. That's going to be hard because they have to first figure out, while they're tapped, they have to figure out, every time I tap, the speed has changed. No, I adjust to the new speed, but it changes again. They're always one step behind because we're continuously changing. So now they really are creating a attentional engagement. And now green, 20% tapping, patterned tapping. This is the prefrontal cortex. Now this is new. This is engaged, you know, now, but by changing the musical structure of the task from simple synchrony to finding where is the time rule, where's the time rule that changes that stuff so I can follow it better. Now the prefrontal areas are active. So now you have actually a exercise created in NMT-based exercise that actually engages the attentional networks of the brain, and how that clinically looks, you will learn across this weekend. So here you see it even in more detail when we have tiny little changes that the people don't hear, but their motor system follows it already. So their fingers move in time. We have this here, the middle part of the prefrontal cortex, then bigger changes over here, and then the really big changes where they know there's something that I need to figure out first. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So an expanding network. And we see in parallel the same network in the cerebellum. There's a network here in the middle of the cerebellum, the vermis, that actually does the basic motor function. And then we have more posterior, the network that looks at here, this one here, and here, in this area that looks at the timing changes. And then we have one back here, one network that predominantly, exclusively actually, responds to the cognitive effort. I need to figure this out. I need to listen and hear what is the rule of change. So we have a cerebellar network, corticocerebellar network for the motor timing. We have a corticocerebellar network for the time differences. And we have a corticocerebellar network for time and cognition. So you can engage these systems with very specific, precise, music-structured attention exercises. Here's the first dissertation under my supervision when I moved to the University of Toronto by Cheryl Jones. She is a NMT fellow. She taught for a while at the University of Miami. She's back in Canada. And then Nicole Richard was a co-author who is now finishing up her dissertation. She just finished up her dissertation actually before I left for India last week. And her main dissertation topics are in autism, and she has already published 2 out of the 3 studies. And so Cheryl did training, only 3 sessions, very quick intervention with chronic TBI, acquired brain injury. And she compared that with all the attention process training, which is sort of the neuropsych gold standard of attention training. And so there's the trail making A. This is a very good assessment where you have a piece of paper with numbers scattered, circled numbers scattered. So you have to go for 1, then you have to find where's 2, where's 3, where's 4, It's a time test. No difference. They have performed equally well. Trail making B is much harder because you have scattered circled numbers and you have scattered circled letters. So you have a letter sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A number sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have a letter sequence A, B, C, D, D, and then you have to connect those in first position, second position, third position. So 1, A, 2, B, and that is difficult for people with traumatic brain injury, virtually impossible for mid-stage Alzheimer's and so. So here, Cheryl found actually a very interesting a significant improvement advantage for MACT, musical attention control training. Pre-test, post-test, only 3 sessions. And the attention process training, it got a little worse, but it was no significant difference. So you can read that study in Neurorehabilitation. It was published in 2020. Neglect, you will learn all about neglect. And neglect is a lack of the ability to process visual information in the left visual fields in both eyes. So people do not spend any attention over here. Everything is here. So how do you get people to move into that neglect field? I can show you just a still picture by putting phone bars in. This one is arranged in an octave into the neglect field, and then she has to play and find the missing tone bars to complete the octave. That's a very effective setup because the musical structure tells the lady here, da, dee, da, da. Where's the rest? Search, da, dee, da, da. So quite a few studies have been out about this in the last 10, 12 years. One of my PhD students from Korea, Kyurin Kang, she did her master's thesis while we were still at Colorado State together. And she's now a postdoc at Johns Hopkins. So we are very proud of that. She did a case study, two case study with very unusual people, because these people were, this one was, lady was 7 years post-stroke and this person was 2 years post-stroke. So that's pretty rare because neglect usually clears up by itself, although it needs to be treated while it's still there. And so she got better. Pre-test, post-test, each session, very little carryover, but improvements were on average significant. This person got after second session, they always got better, but after second session also there was carryover, continued improvements, then also significant. So we published that in Frontiers in Neurology in 2019, and that's a nice contribution to neglect training, which is really a great, very, very effective technique. A little bit on MSOT, disorders of consciousness. This is an interesting study to actually see what happens in the brain when we don't think anything is happening, because we don't have any behavioral response. So these were post-comatose patients. It's a French study, and this is minimal cognitive state, and this is vegetative state. These people listen to tapes randomly distributed with first names, and every so often their own first name was interspersed. And before that listening experience, they listened to familiar music or white noise. That was the auditory control position. So a priming situation before they heard those names. And then the measurement was what happens when they hear their own name. Is there something happening, recognition type in the brain, although we don't have any behavioral response? And there is, after they hear their familiar music, in 7 out of 13 patients, we have a distinct cerebral response here, amplitude increase here, 200 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds later, really big one here. So these people had there was a brain signature of recognizing something familiar. 6 patients didn't have any response. And then in the control condition, priming with white noise, there was also only 1 patient who had a distinct cerebral response. So this was associated with good recovery, and this was not so good recovery. So MSOT is probably one of the most effective techniques to work on baseline attention, because the auditory system is open. And the nice thing is, with this group of patients where we usually don't see any overt responses, behavioral responses, brain research gives actually now some confidence to the auditory music-based modality. We can skip that. We did some traumatic executive function training, published a paper in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. In the VA system, these were chronic traumatic brain injury patients. Executive training, Corinne will demonstrate that to you. It's music, improvisation, spontaneous composition based. And the music executive function training improved significantly. Standard neuropsych, not significant. There is probably potentially a ceiling effect. These people are already so much better at pre-test, whereas these people are much worse, so they had a long way. They could have had a long way to get them. Okay, so skip that. Memory. So this is probably one of the cognition areas that is the best researched. And we did a study with MS patients. And we looked at music as a mnemonic device. So in other words, the ABC song modality, singing words better than spoken presentation. We use the Ray auditory learning test. Those are word lists of unrelated words. And that was the little jingle I wrote versus the standard verbal spoken presentation. You have acquisition trials where you learn, and then you have post-tests, 2 post-tests where you're supposed to retrieve. So in this singing condition, people actually remembered on average at the first pre-test, the post-test, 77%. 20 minutes later, still 70% basically. In the spoken condition, 65%, so significantly less. And then 20 minutes later, that was even more declined. So the musical mnemonic clearly worked with the MS patients in a very significant fashion. And you can see here maybe why, because this is the pairs of words remembered, recalled in correct order. And you can see that music was quite superior to that. So in other words, the melodic structure created an order of the words. Like we never sing night, so silent, we never sing night silent. We always sing silent night. So even after this very short exposure, when they said drum curtain, they got a point. If they said drum bell, they didn't get a point. So sequence learning is maybe one of the keys mechanisms here for music as a mnemonic device. Interestingly, when we had the first record, when we saw this brain signature, this network here emerge during a learning moment, then we knew that word was actually firmly learned and would be recalled at the post-test. So there is an early sort of architecture, network architecture, that says that is already a stable memory. That'll come back in a few minutes. We never saw that effect, any kind of effect in the spoken presentation. Okay, so there is a clear effect of music as a mnemonic device that creates very quickly stable memories, the ABC song. Last thing I want to show you is long-term musical network in MCI and Alzheimer's disease. We know anecdotally that Alzheimer's patients remember a lot of music, a lot of words, sometimes completely out of sync with the rest of their memory function. So we wanted to know why. That was really not clear. And so I think we produced 2 papers that we may consider landmark papers to create a very solid foundation for your work with music and memory in MCI and Alzheimer's. So the first thing we did was we created playlists with the help of the subject and the caregiver, spouse, of music they had known and still recognized for 25 plus years. And then we created a second playlist where we composed new music in the same genre, the same style. And we played that music to them 60 minutes before they went into the brain scanner. So you had a 25-year-old musical memory and a 60-minute, 1-hour musical memory. And here are the different networks. This is the blue is the 60-minute network. Basically auditory, just hearing something, very little other engagement in the brain in terms of prefrontal areas, et cetera, cognitive areas. Totally different, the 25 plus year musical memory. network, a huge network, lots of prefrontal areas that indicate cognitive efforts, probably related to autobiographical saliency. So the music had some memory meaning, autobiographical memory meaning to them. And then areas of the brain that are not affected by the disease process, basal ganglia and cerebellum. So we have a preservation network for music in the brain of these people, Alzheimer's, and some of them were MCI. So we did then we did 3 weeks of listening in the second study. So pre-test, brain scan, neuropsych testing, the MoCA. Then after 3 weeks, brain scan again and the MoCA, and we found actually after 3 weeks of daily listening to their autobiographically relevant music, we found a significant improvement in the memory test, which is very unusual because Alzheimer patients do not improve on anything. They're just good. You try to maintain as much. We looked also at network connectivity, and there was some restoration. Okay, let's go back to the 4 principles. They're really, really good, I think. There was some restoration of connectivity here in the inferior frontal gyrus, and here inferior frontal gyrus and the right thalamus, and connectivity in the middle cingulate and the right medial frontal cortex. So that was good. And then we did follow that up with a microstructure, white matter microstructure analysis, post-intervention. And we found actually density of white matters in certain areas increased, which is great because that means white matter is the highway, the active highway, the axons. There were more axonal activation, so the highways were busier. And that brain was overall, you can describe it as a more active, functionally active brain. So these were 2 studies that got a lot of play in the media, and those give you a great basis to work with memory, especially with dementia cases, and goes back to connectivity, augmented feedback, entrainment, I hope, throughout the last 2 hours. Same mechanism at work. You have 4 very strong mechanisms to work with. And this is where I'm going to stop. You have 4 mechanisms that operate in music perception, music cognition, and music production on a brain basis. Music creates entrainment, rhythmic entrainment, that, in other words, it regulates time organization in the brain for all domains, in all areas, motor, cognitive, speech. Music-based interventions create augmented feedback for learning, improved learning to restore function. And music-based interventions create functional connectivity that is greatly enhanced only in music-based interventions. And there are 2 mechanisms at work, sub-mechanisms. One is shifting into alternate networks. Think MIT, for restoring previously functional networks. So that's my lab. We have a research associate. We had a postdoc. We need to replace them. Graduate students, MS2. We have 1-year MA students. Then we have a large group of PhD students from many different countries. We have a research coordinator. Germany, China, Taiwan, US, Canada, New Zealand, Indonesia, Argentina. It's a great international group. Very bright people. And then we have lots of collaborators that are cross-appointed in Mark. And you'll see one familiar name here, Corinne Hartout. Then from many other areas of the campus, cross-appointed, and then we also have international collaborators in other areas, in the US, in Germany. And that's it. I want to play this. Very practical application of RS. Practical output response. Great, she actually gets across the street. She can overcome freezing. And I try to show you data, some of the mechanisms in terms of dopamine, in terms of restoration of some of the brainwave signals, and other things in the brain that actually probably happen. No, not probably happened actually right there when this lady in Norway got across the street. Some of these things I showed you from a lab point of view, they just happened when you saw that lady walk across the street. Capable of doing this. Otherwise, without the music, without the metronome, in this case, she would have frozen and stood there and not got across.